The Starlight Echo Chapter 1: The Weight of the Sky. The morning in Green Hills was aggressively quiet. A week had passed since the sky had nearly burned, yet the town had returned to its rhythmic, small-town normalcy as if the Eclipse Canon were nothing more than a bad dream. Inside the Wachowski household, the kitchen was a whirlwind of blue and yellow. Sonic was mid-zip, sliding a plate of pancakes across the table toward Tails, while Knuckles stared intensely at a toaster, waiting for it to yield its bounty.
"Slow down, Blue,"
Tom said, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee.
"The pancakes aren't going to run away, unlike you."
"Can't help it, Dad."
Sonic grinned, though his movements were a fraction slower than usual. The bruises from his fall to Earth had faded, but the memory of his superform giving out still lingered in the back of his mind.
"We've got a big day. Tails is recalibrating the Miles Electric, and Knuckles promised to show me that warrior stretch that supposedly cracks every bone in your body."
It is essential for combat readiness.
Knuckles grunted, not breaking eye contact with the toaster. Maddie smiled, though her eyes drifted toward the window.
It's nice to have a normal Saturday. After last week, I think we all earned a bit of boring.
Miles away, tucked into the dense, rain-slicked evergreen forest that bordered the town, boring was a foreign concept. Shadow leaned against the jagged bark of a cedar tree, his chest rising and falling in a slow, calculated rhythm. His fur was matted with dried mud and pine needles, and the golden rings around his wrists were scuffed from the sheer force of the Eclipse Cannon's redirection. He had spent the last 7 days moving like a ghost through the shadows, avoiding the gun patrols that were still scouring the impact zones. He looked up through the canopy. The sun was high, but to him the sky still felt heavy. Every time he closed his eyes, he didn't see the explosion or the metal halls of the gun base. He saw a different sky, one viewed through a reinforced window decades ago. He saw the way the light had caught Maria's hair as she pointed out the constellations, whispering about how the light of a star continues to reach the Earth long after the star itself is gone. The light still shines. He looked down at his gloved hands. They were shaking. He wasn't a lab creation, wasn't a weapon of mass destruction. He was an outsider who had crashed into this world on a meteor, only to be locked away by men like Walters. He needed a place to regroup. He needed to understand why he had saved a world that had spent 50 years trying to bury him. Walking toward the edge of the tree line, Shadow caught the scent of wood smoke and the distant sound of laughter. It was coming from a house nestled on the outskirts of the hills. A house with a truck in the driveway and a sense of permanence he had never known. He didn't know the blue hedgehog's full story, or why those humans looked at the aliens as family, but he knew he couldn't stay in the woods forever. Shadow stepped out from the tree line, his crimson eyes fixed on the distant red roof of the Wachowski home. He began to move, not with a burst of chaos energy, but with the steady, weary gait of a soldier looking for a reason to stop fighting. The moment the kitchen door creaked open, the playful banter inside the Wachowski house died instantly. Sonic was mid-sentence, laughing at one of Knuckles' overly serious warrior anecdotes, when he saw the silhouette against the porch light. He froze. The plate of pancakes he was holding tipped slightly, syrup pooling toward the edge, but he didn't notice. His emerald eyes went wide, pupils shrinking as they locked onto the dark fur and the familiar, jagged crimson stripes. For a heartbeat, Sonic didn't breathe. He couldn't. The last image he had of Shadow was a speck of black and gold against the blinding, white-hot roar of the Eclipse Canon, a sacrifice made while Sonic himself was plummeting toward the Earth, helpless as his own power flickered out.
"Shadow?"
The name came out as a broken whisper, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. Then the sonic speed kicked in, but not for a fight. In a blur of blue, the plate was abandoned on the counter and Sonic was across the room. He stopped just inches away from Shadow, his hands hovering in the air, twitching, as if he were afraid that reaching out would make the image shatter like a hologram.
You're actually here,"
Sonic said, his voice cracking with a raw, unfiltered relief.
"We looked, Shadow. We looked everywhere for days. Tails flew the plane until the engines practically melted, and Knuckles and I tore through every inch of that impact site.
Sonic's chest heaved. The weight he'd been carrying for the last week, the guilt of being the one who made it, while the others stayed behind, began to crumble. He looked at Shadow's scuffed rings and the weary set of his shoulders, and for a second the cocky, fast-talking hero vanished. He just looked like the kid who had spent years alone in a cave, terrified of losing the few people who finally made him feel like he belonged.
You big dummy.
Sonic choked out, a watery, lopsided grin finally breaking through the shock.
You really kept us waiting, didn't you?
Without thinking about Shadow's preference for personal space, or the fact that the dark hedgehog usually greeted people with a spin kick, Sonic lunged forward, throwing his arms around Shadow in a fierce, bone-crushing hug. He buried his face into the white tuft of fur on Shadow's chest, his shoulders shaking just a little.
Don't do that again.
Sonic muttered into the fur, his voice thick.
Don't you ever do that again.
Shadow froze. His entire body went rigid, muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. In the 50 years since he had plummeted to Earth in a meteor, and the decades spent in the cold silence of a gun stasis pod, he had never been touched like this. Not with this much need. He looked down at the top of the blue head buried in his chest fur. He could feel the tremor's fine rhythmic shakes that vibrated through Sonic's small frame and into Shadow's own bruised ribs. It wasn't just the adrenaline of a survivor. It was the shaking of someone who had looked at an empty sky for a week and finally found what they were searching for. Shadow's hand, scarred and stained with the soot of the Eclipse Canon, hovered awkwardly in the air near Sonic's shoulder. He didn't push him away. He couldn't.
Why is he like this?
Shadow wondered, his crimson eyes widening in genuine confusion. He remembered their conversation on the moon, the quiet moment before the chaos, where the wind didn't blow and the stars felt close enough to touch. Sonic had mentioned someone named Longclaw. He hadn't said much, just a name and a heavy silence that followed it. But seeing the hedgehog fall apart like this now made the pieces click into place. Shadow realized that for all of Sonic's speed and loudmouth bravado, there was a hollow space inside him that looked remarkably like his own. Whatever had happened to that owl Longclaw, it had left Sonic terrified of the silence. It had left him vulnerable.
Hedgehog?
Shadow said, his voice raspy and lower than usual. He didn't use Sonic's name. He wasn't there yet, but the edge of his typical coldness had been blunted. He felt the dampness of Sonic's fur against his chest and realized the hero of Earth was actually crying. Shadow's hand finally descended, not to shove, but to rest with a heavy, uncertain weight on Sonic's back. It wasn't a return hug, but it was an acknowledgement.
I am not a ghost.
Shadow muttered, his eyes drifting over Sonic's head to meet the stunned gazes of the two humans and the other two small creatures in the kitchen.
And I do not intend to become one today. Release me before you break a rib.
Despite the command, Shadow didn't move. He felt the warmth of the house, the smell of the pancakes, the hum of the heater, and the steady, frantic heartbeat of the boy clinging to him. For a fleeting second, the image of Maria flashed in his mind, pointing at the stars. The light still shines. Maybe this was what she meant. Even when the star was gone, the warmth stayed behind in the people who remembered it. Shadow's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates, as he felt the structural integrity of his personal bubble vanish entirely.
Wait.
Shadow started, his hand still awkwardly resting on Sonic's back.
I said release me, not.
He didn't get to finish. With a joyful high-pitched yelp, Tails was the next to strike. The fox didn't even hesitate, his twin tails spinning like frantic propellers before he launched himself at the pair, burying his face into Shadow's side.
You are alive!
Tails cried, his voice muffled by black fur.
The energy readings said the blast radius was absolute, but you actually did it. You are incredible!
Shadow let out a sharp
Oomph.
As the air was knocked out of him. He looked up, desperate for a way out, only to find Knuckles looming over them. The echidna wasn't crying, but his amethyst eyes were shimmering with a fierce warrior's respect.
A feat of true strength.
Knuckles rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through the floorboards.
To stare into the sun and refuse to blink, you have the soul of a gladiator, Shadow. You shall not stand alone this day.
With a heavy armored thud, Knuckles wrapped his massive arms around the entire trio, pulling them all into a crushing embrace that lifted Shadow's feet several inches off the hardwood floor.
Seize this.
Shadow hissed, his muffled voice coming from somewhere deep inside the pile of blue, yellow, and red fur.
This is highly inefficient. I am covered in soot. I have spikes. I am dangerous.
You're a big softy is what you are.
Sonic laughed, his voice sounding much clearer now that the initial sob had passed, though he still didn't let go. He squeezed tighter, feeling the solid reality of Shadow's presence. Shadow stopped struggling for a moment. He was pinned between the frantic heartbeat of a fox, the crushing strength of an echidna, and the trembling relief of the hedgehog who had lost too much already. It was warm, unnervingly warm. It smelled like fabric softener, maple syrup, and the strange electric scent of home. His quills, which had been bristling in a defensive prickle-ball stance, slowly began to lay flat.
Tom? Maddie?
Shadow gasped out, his head barely poking out from the top of the huddle. He looked toward the two humans with a look of genuine wide-eyed panic.
Control your offspring. They are malfunctioning.
Tom just leaned against the counter, sharing a knowing, tearful smile with Maddie as he took a slow sip of his coffee.
Sorry, Shadow.
Tom said, his voice thick with a mix of humor and relief.
Once you're part of the family, the hugs are mandatory. You're just gonna have to ride this one out.
The kitchen had eventually quieted down. Tails and Knuckles had been shooed away by Maddie to prepare the guest quarters, which mostly involved Knuckles carrying an entire sofa by himself, leaving Sonic and Shadow alone at the wooden table. Sonic was picking at a cold pancake, his green eyes still a bit red-rimmed. Shadow sat opposite him, looking stiff and out of place in the domestic warmth. He looked at his scarred palms, then up at Sonic.
Hedgehog.
Shadow began, his voice low.
During that display on the porch, why did you react with such instability? You are a warrior. You have faced villains and saved the world, yet you shook like a leaf in the wind.
Sonic's hand paused over his plate. He let out a dry, self-deprecating laugh.
I told you on the moon, Shadow. I lost Longclaw. She was my world, and she gave her life so I could get to Earth. When I saw you fall, I thought I was watching it happen all over again. I've spent enough time being the only one left.
Shadow tilted his head, his crimson eyes scanning Sonic's face.
You speak as if loss is your shadow. But you are not alone here. Those humans, Walter's subordinates? Why are they permitted to remain in your presence?
Sonic blinked, then a soft smile touched his lips.
They aren't guns, Shadow. That's Tom and Maddie. Tom's the sheriff here. They aren't just permitted to be here. They're my mom and dad.
The air seemed to leave Shadow's lungs. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white.
Mom and Dad, they are humans. You are not.
I know.
Sonic said softly.
But they took me in when I had nothing. I spent 10 years in a cave, Shadow. 10 years watching them from the bushes, pretending I was part of their lives because I was too scared to show my face. When they finally found me, they didn't see a monster or an alien. They saw a kid who needed a home. They're the reason I fought so hard to save this place.
Shadow felt a cold, sharp stone of guilt drop into the pit of his stomach. He remembered the London gun headquarters. He remembered the chaos, the confusion, and the man wearing the face of the commander who had imprisoned him for 50 years. He remembered the feeling of his fist connecting with Tom's jaw, and the way Sonic had screamed in a way that sounded like his heart was being torn out.
The man in London.
Shadow whispered, his voice tight.
The one with the disguise device. I struck him. I thought he was Walters. I thought he was the monster who took Maria.
I know you did.
Sonic said, looking down at the table.
I didn't blame you for being confused, Shadow. But watching my dad go down like that, it was the scariest moment of the whole mission. I thought I'd lost him before I even got the chance to say goodbye.
Shadow closed his eyes, his head bowing. The realization hit him with the force of a chaos spear. He hadn't just attacked a human official. He had attacked the father of the only person who had tried to understand him. He had inflicted the very pain he had spent 50 years mourning on someone who called him a brother.
I did not know.
Shadow said, his voice barely a breath.
I saw a face I hated, and I lashed out. I have caused you a great dishonor.
Hey.
Sonic reached across the table, placing a hand on Shadow's arm.
You didn't know. And Tom? He's the most forgiving guy I know. He doesn't hold it against you. He's already talking about where we're going to put your bed.
Shadow looked up, his expression haunted.
He wishes for me to stay after I laid hands on him.
Welcome to the Wachowski family, Shadow.
Sonic grinned, though his eyes were sincere.
We're a bit messy, and we hug way too much, but we don't leave anyone behind. Not even grumpy space hedgehogs.